Good morning. Today's Bible study comes from Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37, and they read as follows. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They went to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Amen. Now, as you know, this is Jesus' prediction a second time about his death. And they had left the place and passed through Galilee. They were going to Capernaum. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because Jesus had plans. He was doing something else. And it tells you in verse 31, because he was teaching his disciples. And he was teaching his disciples things that they would need, things that they were going to need to know. And he had to give them some understanding on some things that they weren't comprehending. And he starts it off right away. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." And when he says men, he means the people that are out to kill him, the people that are going against him, who hate him, um, because that he was the sacrifice. And he tells you right in the next part of the verse what they're going to do. They will kill me, or he says they will kill him. And after 3 days, though, I got the power, is what will happen, because in 3 days he will rise. And he had spoken about the temple being destroyed, and 3 days later it will be made whole and come back and all that. But he's telling his disciples this, and he tells them, "But in 3 days I will rise. Just believe." He's been talking about belief. So he was giving them something to believe in and telling them truth. I will rise in 3 days. But they didn't understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. And we shouldn't be afraid to ask the Lord about anything. He'll give you the answer if it's truly something that you seek and it's something that's worthy to be answered. You can't know everything, but what he will share with you, you'll get a yes, no, or maybe. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, and he only asked them because he knew and heard, but he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" Uh-oh. Jesus heard us arguing. We were doing wrong. But when you feel guilty and when you're doing the wrong thing, what did they do? They kept quiet, because on the way, they were arguing about something that meant nothing. Who was the greatest? Hmm. Well, we already knew who the greatest was because he was the one asking the question. But if you look at the greatest one, he was doing the most serving. So Jesus sat down with his 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant to all." In order to be considered first to the Lord or in the kingdom, or to even be considered a child of God, you have to have servitude in your heart. You have to have the ability to serve others and want to serve others. And almost at all times. Jesus did this constantly. So Jesus does this, and he always does this. He shows them an example this time. He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them. So Jesus is holding his child and talking with the child sitting there. "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. Now, we might think it's just the age of the child. We may think he means a little kid, but he's talking in spirit. Welcome young in spirit. Welcome them. And whoever welcomes them welcomes me. But then he puts some more gravy on top of it. And he says, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, or he's saying does not welcome me only, or I'm not the only one that they welcome, but they welcome the one who sent me, or they also welcome my Father. They welcome God, because this child, and this is spiritual speaking, he's talking about, it doesn't matter about their age, it's their spirit. If they come to me like a little child, and when you think about a child, because if he would have said an adult, it would have been different. But when you think about a child is dependent. They're not independent, they're dependent. They depend on mom and dad for food. They depend on mom and dad for clothing. They depend on mom and dad for protection. They depend on mom and dad for shelter. They depend on mom and dad to live. Mom and dad is everything to them, because that's all they know is mom and dad. And any questions they have, mom and dad. Any problems they have, mom and dad. When they cry, mom and dad. When they're happy, mom and dad. When they're worried, go to mom and dad. That's why he picked a child, because if he had picked one of us adults, you know us, we done got learned, we intelligent, we set in our ways. But this child, that's why he used the image of a child. So when you go to God totally dependent on him. And you welcome those that are totally dependent on the Lord and young in the spirit, so you can teach them how to go to the Lord and how to depend on the Lord even more, and learn about the Lord's word, and learn all these things that I just told you would depend on your parents as, and give it to the Lord, because that's who it goes to. And when you do that, you welcome them not only to Christ, but you welcome them to God, because now they are part of the kingdom. They are a child in the kingdom. And you notice it says welcomes. Whoever welcomes. When you welcome somebody, it's not you better get over here. It is loving welcome. It is a kind welcoming. It is a patient welcoming. It is a gracious and mercy welcoming, knowing that you had the same thing extended to you. It is a welcoming, knowing that you weren't the only one that got welcome here, because I was in your shoes and they were good to me, and the Lord was good to me and welcomed me in and showed me who he is, so I could see who I need to be. But it was welcoming all the way. So be that little child when you go to the Lord, so you can depend on the Lord. Amen.